Good morning. Thank you for joining us. We're here today to talk about providing convenient and simple integrated transport pricing and travel planning. This is the second in a series of 3 webinars. So last month we looked more closely at data. There was kind of the feeling that there's the data, there's the technology, there's the government commitment, but there are probably quite big issues with different organisations sharing data. So today we're going to focus a little bit more on the pricing and travel planning. Could we go to the next slide, please, Deval? So we've got a fantastic lineup. We've got some great speakers this morning. We're going to do a little bit of scene setting for you. So Stephen's going to give us a little bit about the context of what we need from a national integrated transport system. Lucy will give us some case studies from England, case studies from Europe, just kind of share what's happening at the moment. Chris will bring that back to England and kind of have a look at some of the data issues with that. And then I'm delighted to say we've got some representatives from local authorities who are all doing incredibly exciting things in their areas. So we do have presentations for you, but actually what we really want from this morning is a fantastic discussion. So you'll see you've got 2 ways of interacting. There's a chat and there's a Q&A. If you use the chat, it probably won't be monitored by us, but you are able to interact with each other. So it might be you want to make comments to each other. If you actually have a question for us or, for the panelists or for me to ask the panelists, please use the Q&A because we will keep an eye on that. Before we finish the session, I'll try and kind of capture as many questions as I can, but before we finish the session, I'll give you a chance to ask any last questions in case we've missed anything. But really, how interesting this session is depends on you and the questions that you ask, because we've got some fantastic experience on our panel today, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from them. So I'm going to stop talking for a while. I'm going to hand you over to Stephen's very capable hands to give us a bit of background.
Many thanks, Sally. I'm just going to load up my slides for this. Give me just a moment. It's a real pleasure to be joining you from a beautifully sunny Bristol as well, which is a rare sight for those of you who know the Southwest. And as Sally's just been saying, I'm here to provide a bit of a high-level view of why kind of what we're talking about today kind of matters and kind of where this agenda has come from before handing over to all of the people who kind of are making it happen in various ways, either within this country or worldwide. And I'm looking forward to learning a lot from them as we go through this. So to start with, as many on this call will already know, back in November, the former Transport Secretary launched the vision for an integrated national transport strategy alongside a call for ideas on how to make transport work better for people across the country. And the team responsible for this strategy within Department for Transport are now touring the country, running roadshows, capturing even more ideas from quite a diverse range of perspectives and testing what people really want from an integrated transport strategy. And the impetus for this strategy didn't come out of nowhere. It was called for a lot of times by a lot of different people, including the Institute for Civil Engineers, the Chartered Institute of Highways and Transportation, the Transport Planning Society, and the National Infrastructure Commission. And within Labour, it was a central recommendation from their independent rail and urban transport review. It also was the #1 recommendation from us at the Institute for Public Policy Research going into the election period. And these calls all recognise kind of a central issue, which was there's a gap in UK government's approach to transport. There was no clear vision of where we're heading, the modal strategies that sit in isolation from each other and occasionally pull in very different directions, and very little evidence of joined up thinking between transport and other parts of government. From Labour's perspective, the inspiration for this strategy and kind of front and centre of the vision when it was launched was a visit from the Transport Secretary undertook to Dijon in North France, a city roughly the size of Chester. And at the launch, the Transport Secretary noted that Dijon has an integrated transport system that is reliable, efficient and effective, and that a single app brings together everything from bus to tram, car hire to bike hire, and you're planning your journey to paying for parking. And this integration even stretches to the fares and car parking being priced dynamically depending on levels of air pollution. It's fair to say that she was a fan, and this came up both at the launch but also in appearances at Transport Committee and kind of at the dispatch box as well. And she noted that the key enabler for this within Dijon was having the right powers to bring all of those kind of integrations together. One of the things I'd note that she didn't mention was that included within those powers for places like Dijon is the ability to raise funding via a dedicated public transport tax. IPPR, like many working in transport policy, are excited by the potential of this strategy and kind of what that means for people across the country. But we also know that we have heard some of this before. When John Prescott held the transport brief, he wanted to launch something that looked a lot like this, and it didn't then lead to the transformative change that he imagined. So we've been doing a bit of thinking about what we think a strategy can look like and kind of how it can be successful and progressive. In a recent article up on our website, so I'm not going to go into loads and loads of detail. Now you can go away and read it if this is at all interesting, kind of relevant to your work. We identify 7 tests for the integrated national transport strategy. And unlike kind of the details and the nuts and bolts of integration that you're going to hear from other speakers, a lot of what we were talking about is the kind of joined up thinking that is required within government to ensure that the strategy has the buy-in that's going to make this a success, that it's providing kind of real clarity to those who are going to have to deliver it, including within local government, and we'll hear more from them later, that it isn't seen in isolation from things like spatial planning. It addresses the needs of those who are most excluded today from the transport system. It leads to a tangible change in how decisions are made, particularly those about investment priorities. It's a driver of environmental action, and it genuinely empowers local government. I said I'm not going to dwell on kind of all of these, but I'm now going to go through kind of 3 of the ones that I think maybe are most relevant or kind of inform what we're going to be talking about today. So the first of these is that kind of clear sense of where are we going, what are we trying to achieve, and what kind of transport's role within kind of national government, but also kind of local government agendas. And I'm sure, again, that many of the people who have tuned in today would have heard the government talk about its missions. It might have then got confused by whether or not that's a milestone or a step or whatever it might be. But it's clear to me that kind of these 5 missions are central drivers of government policy making. And what this new transport strategy and what kind of everyone in transport policy is trying to do today is show how transport is working to support these goals. And that includes demonstrating kind of directly to the Treasury and number 10 for the political support and the money that's going to make this a reality. And I think it is worth repeating that transport is incredibly well placed to support delivery of these missions. People interact with it on a daily basis, and it's a major financial cost for many people. It's key to local prosperity and kind of supporting local growth plans. You're not going to get to net zero without it, as the Climate Change Committee laid out for us yesterday. It informs people's perception of safety, and we also know that progress on reducing road danger has stalled in recent years. It can provide people with access to opportunities, to community life, to so many things. It shapes childhood experiences and their ability to kind of live independent lives. And it also has significant consequences for people's health and well-being. So our big ask of the team in DFT who've been tasked with developing this strategy is they need to present the most credible case possible within government that transport is the central enabler of these things, and the integrated national transport strategy is kind of really should do that and demonstrate the joined up thinking and benefits of investing in this approach. And within Institute for Public Policy Research, we focus kind of extensively on inequality and those who feel least served by today's transport system. And for us, it feels like this strategy should have trying to alleviate kind of transport-related social exclusion kind of at its heart. And when we're talking about people, we should be very, very clear kind of who these people are, kind of diversity of needs represented within this country. This diagram that I've put up on the screen here is a very loose interpretation of recent work by Transport for the North on transport-related social exclusion. And if you're interested in this kind of topic, I urge you to go away and read all of their work and play around with their data tools. It's a fantastic kind of resource for anyone doing transport policy or delivery, I would say. And this kind of diagram is describing how wider inequality within society, be that kind of a social and economic, environmental or democratic inequality, interacts with unequal access to good transport options. And you can find this inequality play out across income, age, gender, sexuality, ethnicity, disability, all linked to where people live, kind of geography. And this inequality in turn leads to gaps in access to opportunities and higher levels of costly car dependency and car dominated spaces, which in turn creates a social exclusion and financial hardship and leads to the negative impacts of cars, which, like air quality concerns, are not experienced equally. And this creates a kind of a reinforcing cycle of inequality in both that access to transport and kind of wider within society. And we see this strategy from a kind of transport perspective is one of the best opportunities we've got within this parliament to directly address this cycle and kind of set a path to something different, something more inclusive. And the other point, which I think shouldn't need saying, but I think it does bear repeating, is that no policy should be being developed within transport or anywhere else within government without putting kind of concerns for rapid emissions reductions kind of front and centre. So we see the integrated national transport strategy and kind of any equivalents at a local level as needing to be a catalyst for climate action. And that means following the Avoid, Shift, Improve framework, which has been kind of laid out by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and indeed kind of any number of other institutions kind of working on this area. And as is shown on the screen here, and embedding the sustainable transport hierarchy within decision-making frameworks. And that includes kind of those around appraisal and decisions around investment, as we've seen kind of the Welsh Government do so effectively. And I think the solutions that we're talking about today and that kind of learning from the ground should really speak to the role of integrated transport into supporting the shift to more sustainable travel modes. It can relate to the introduction of economic incentives to travel more greenly and kind of in different ways. It's providing people with better information about how to make those journeys and which journeys are green to make. And is also kind of obviously reflects a fantastic use of new technologies, and there's so much potential there to innovate and provide kind of new solutions for people. And then the last thing I was going to say, and this is slightly taking some findings that we've got in an upcoming report about bus governments and bus investment. We've developed a set of principles that are based on research that we've done with communities across the UK, kind of England, Wales and Scotland mostly, on kind of what people want from local travel and in particular local buses, which are really the kind of bedrock of so many experiences of the public transport system. And the principles they lay out here are kind of, they want it to be accessible and inclusive, connected, reliable, affordable with simple fares, attractive and safe, well integrated, sustainable and accountable to the public, giving them a role to shape it and make sure it is working for them. And I think there's lots of questions I think those principles then can be used to inform around kind of how you're designing different products at the local level, kind of what those apps look like, who has access to the apps, can you still access the same benefits if you don't have a smartphone or you don't have kind of internet, all of those kind of things come through. And I think the primary question that or primary set of questions I think for me around how we then deliver things locally are the points on, can everyone use this and can it be adapted to suit different people's travel needs? Does it take people where they need to go? Is it truly doorstep to destination? Is it reliable and affordable? Does it feel safe at all times of day and night? And does the public have a role in shaping it? And is it kind of fostering kind of greater trust in local public transport and through that, hopefully, a bit more trust in local government and beyond? And that's all I was going to say today. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand back to Sally to pass us on to the next set of people.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Before you go, I think that was a really good strategic overview. I just want to pick you up on something you said towards the start, where you said this isn't something new. John Prescott tried it. In your view, just that national look, are things different now? Can we be any more optimistic?
Yes. I think we can be more optimistic, and keep me up in the morning being more optimistic. There's two sides to that optimism. One, I think, was laid out by Andy Burnham in the run up to the election, is that we're in a completely different space on devolution than we were before. That there is a local ability, capacity, desire for change, and that. I think we have the wiring to deliver this in a way we didn't back then. Everything was much more top down. We're still in that point of view. Like Westminster still have a lot of power, more power than they should have, but we've got that kind of wiring there. And I think the other bit that gives me hope is that there is significant public support and local political support for action on net zero. And as much as we should be concerned about the rise of populism and kind of voices that might challenge climate action, it's not what you hear when you go out and talk to the public on so many of these things, that there is support for kind of the green agenda that so much of this is speaking to.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We will talk again later during the panel, but I'd like to hand over to Lucy.
Thanks, Sally, and thanks, Stephen. Hi, everyone. It's good to be here with you all this morning. I'm Lucy Whitehead, the Global Product Director from Worldline, and I'm going to talk about some of the systems, data and solutions that sit behind an integrated transport offering, and then take you through 3 case studies that we're involved with, talking about different approaches to the integration of those transport networks. So if you'd like to just move on to the next slide, thanks. So at Worldline, we have a plethora of solutions and products that sit behind both the operations and the retailing of transport solutions. Some of those are along the lines of customer information systems. Some of them are much more focused on the retailing and the payments and the full end-to-end payment processing of fares and ticketing. And then some of them are more based on sort of the mobility platforms that bring together both journey planning, booking and paying for integrated transport journeys in a one-stop shop approach through a mobility as a service app or integrated transport app. We also do a lot in the settlement of revenues to multiple either train operators through our Lennon solution or through to multiple mobility service providers through our mass mobility and marketplace platform. We also provide a number of open payment solutions, such as contactless EMV payments in a number of the French cities, and I'll take you through a couple of those case studies in a minute. One of them being Dijon, where we were the first. Dijon was the first city to provide contactless payment in France, and we were there from the initial outset of that, providing open payment on their trams, buses, and also park and ride. So, right from the start, back in 2017, they were thinking about that integration of their transport network back then and how you could integrate park and ride with, the bus and the tram network to extend the offering to their citizens and users. If you'd like to just move on to the next slide. So just to show that we always take a customer-centric approach to our products and looking at how the solutions and the data are integrated across the customer or passenger experience, from the booking, the paying, collecting of tickets, passenger information, validating and inspection of those tickets, on board or at station announcements, reservation solutions, and then also the onward journeys that to integrate into other modes. So there's a whole number of solutions and products that we have that sit behind that, and it's really important that all of these speak to each other, work with each other, or integrated with each other, and the data that sits behind them is also working with each other as well. So if you'd like to just move on to the next slide. I won't dwell on this too much, but it just gives some of the facts and stats about where Worldline is is present and some of our experience. But I'll just to talk without slides on 3 of the key case studies of different approaches that we're very much involved with on integrating transport. So one of them is SYSTRA, which is the Transport Authority in control of all of the public transport in the city of Lyon, France's second largest city. And there we provide the open payment solution across all of their modes. So it's quite a London style approach. They've got trams, metro, bus, funicular, park and ride as well. And they have a fully integrated open payment solution across those with capping solutions, both weekly and daily capping. And it works as one network as you would experience in London. They have a simple fare structure, which is easy for the users and passengers to understand. And it's had a real success. And they're now seeing over 50% of single trips being purchased through contactless. So that's one way of integrating the payment and the fares and the ticketing in that city. Then another example is what we're doing with West of England as part of the Future Transport Zones. We're implementing a mobility as a service app, which brings in the journey planning side of it, brings in the data, also the real-time information, and we are heavily involved in that and implementing that, bringing together bus ticketing, rail ticketing, e-scooter and e-bike solutions as well. So bringing in those micro-mobility solutions for the first and last mile, and extending the connectivity of the existing network and providing the mobility service providers an additional retail channel through which to sell to a new market and a new set of customers. It's not without its challenges, bringing all that data together, different ticketing types, different ticketing solutions that those tickets need to be validated by. But we're a long way along that journey to getting that into the user's hands. And then the final case study that I was wanting to talk about was very new to us. We've recently been awarded the Teacher Unique contract in France, which is a really interesting program. It is, to start with, it's being rolled out in 3 trial regions, but the Ministry of Transport in France has the ambitions to roll that out nationally. And it is the integration of all public transport within France through an app. It is supported by an integrated fares platform that is also part of the program that we're delivering. And the app will work on GPS. So the user will sign up for an account. They will then check in or swipe in to say that they've started their journey, and then swipe out at the end of it, and they'll be able to travel across regions. And the app will detect from their GPS tracking on their mobile device where they've been, what services they've been on, and then calculate the appropriate fare for them. They're also the capability to show a barcode to any gate line that they need to get through, or to be validated on any of the validation devices that they may come across on their journey. So that's a really interesting concept that the French Ministry of Transport are implementing, and they're really supporting it with the appropriate funding to get that off the ground. And we're really excited to see how that is adopted by the users. And yeah, I'm sure we'll be able to update you on that as that is rolled out. So that just shows there's 3 different cases there, 3 different approaches. But we really believe that the payments and ticketing side of it is a key part to the integrated transport provision, especially from a user experience and a customer experience point of view. We really need to make it easy and seamless for them so that it doesn't add to the mental load of, are they going to use public transport rather than just jump in their car? So, we're really focused on how to improve that customer experience and make it a compelling argument so that it is as convenient for them to use the more sustainable modes of transport than car use, and especially the single occupancy car use that we're really trying to help drive down and support others like the local authorities drive that down. So happy to take questions on any of that later in the session, but I think I'll leave it there for now and pass back to Sally.
Thank you so much, Lucy. That was really interesting. I think something that came out in the first webinar in this series was the feeling that the technology is there. It's just the data sharing and actually getting the information to feed in. The sense I've got from yours is that the technology is there. We can do this, but actually...
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, as well as the data sharing, there's also the commercial agreements and arrangements that need to be in place. But those two are absolutely the hurdles that need to be overcome. As you say, the technology is there to integrate it. But it is really reliant on that data and all the parties working together.
Yeah, I think something I'd love to come back to in the panel is how to make local things national. If different areas are developing different technologies, how is that going to fit together? But perhaps we can pick that up a bit later. Thank you so much.
Yes. Okay.
Right, thank you. I'm going to hand over to Chris now.
Okay. Hello. Have we started? Okay, my name is Chris Mosley. For the past 3 years, I've been a principal consultant in the fares and ticketing team at SYSTRA. Next slide. This slide shows the types of work that our team carries out. Personally, I've got over 25 years experience in the bus industry in operations and commercial roles. I started at Arriva and my last company was Centrebus. I've been involved in smart card, mobile ticketing and tap on, tap off in Leicester. And since I've been with SYSTRA, I have worked with the under-22 ITSO cards in Scotland, and I've done quite a number of projects in North Wales, including the tap on, tap off project up there. Also set up some Siri feeds for the small operators in Wales, so they're now tracking as well. Next slide, please. So in my presentation today, I'm going to be looking back at sort of the developments of ticketing payment methods, examining passenger information. I'm going to look at what data is required for the role of a ticket machine in the process, and we're going to discuss common issues that data can be and what causes problems. Then I'm going to look a bit about the future. To maintain the confidence of the travelling public in fares and timetabling information, it is vital that it's accurate. You're going to see it's all about the data. Next click. But more importantly, it's actually about the right data. Click again. Okay, so a quick look back in history of UK fares collections. So in 1986, when bus operations were privatised and deregulated, cash was the key. Commercially orientated entrepreneurial bus operators offered more flexible and discounted tickets, such as season tickets and carnets. The Freedom Pass in London was introduced in 1973, and then in 2008, the NCTS scheme was introduced for pensioners and disabled passengers, and there's similar schemes in Wales and Scotland. These schemes used ITSO-based cards, and bus operators started to upgrade their ticket machines to read these cards, helped by an uplift in their BSOG if their devices were able to read this. In 2000, London started a simplified inner and outer zone fare scale, and that was followed by the launch of Oyster in 2003 as count-based cards. There were a few proprietary smart cards. At that point, I'm going to point out Centrebus had the Carbonara card, which we developed as a cost-effective alternative to an ITSO card in Leicestershire, Lincolnshire and the home counties. But a lot of companies and areas started to use ITSO for account-based ticketing. Some high-profile examples: Go Ahead companies had the Key in 2007, Cardiff had the IF card in 2010, and Transport for West Midlands had Swift Pay As You Go in 2012, but there's many more I haven't mentioned that also existed. With the advent of smartphones, mobile ticket apps started to be launched around the mid-2010s. We're all on mute, but I actually had a question of, does anyone know when the first operator put an app in? I couldn't find who was the first person, but Passenger launched their travel portal in 2018, and they're quite a leading app supplier. In the mid-2000s, bus operators used payment methods like PayZone as a method for passengers to be able to pay off bus while still able to pay with a debit or credit card. The development of the next generation of GPRS-enabled ticket machines allow passengers to pay for tickets on bus using Europay, MasterCard and Visa, or what we call EMV. Later, this developed into CEMV, tap on, tap off, and the ability to cap fares. One of the benefits of tap on, tap off is that passengers do not pay up front for tickets they may not use, and it allows passengers to vary their travel plans at no extra cost, knowing they will always pay the best fare. The development of QR codes as a token for travel has developed in recent years in paper tickets and M-ticket form. And the UK really hasn't taken to off-bus sales as much as it has compared to the rest of Europe. Next slide, please. Passenger information was also very basic in the 1980s, but bus operators and local authorities realised the value of publishing quality bus timetables. We probably remember the Trans Exchange format was started in 2000, and around the same time the travel line, phone line and website started. Siri feeds for real-time and data exchange were developed between 2000 and 2005. London introduced the countdown system, and many cities followed on. And I was involved in Leicester in 2003 with the early Star Track system. BODS, or Bus Open Data Service, is a government-funded service that was established in 2020. It had a phased introduction of timetables, then Siri feeds and fares data. And that's for England, and the other countries are following through with a similar scheme. Again, the mobile phone has revolutionised the use of applications, Google, travel planners, etc. And that is now developing into mobility as a service, and that's why we're all here today. At this point, I'm going to give a bit of a shout out to bustimes.org, which I found a really useful website for bus information, timetables, and to be able to track where my bus is. Next slide. So what data is required? Fares, timetables, and schedules all need to be compiled, entered into a system, and be consistent between those systems. Having a scheduling package like Omnibus or Optibus can ensure that timetables and trip numbers match, not only in the ticketing device, but also in the back office systems. Inputs from the bus system, CAN, or the CAN system, such as odometer and door settings, can result in a more accurate AVL and tracking. ISAMs need to be maintained and kept up to date. I'm sorry if this is all really basic, but there seems to be occasions where we don't seem to be able to get these basics correct, which causes bigger issues down the line. I get the impression that many believe the ticket machine is the start of the data journey, but it actually starts from the registration process of the service and then into the ticket machine system and then on and out again into various requirements. AVL could be provided by separate devices or by the ticket machine on the bus, and again that will give different levels of consistency in the data. Next slide, please. So what can happen if the data is not correct? We're probably all familiar with late and short notice registrations, and they don't get processed in time and the information doesn't appear, or there's false information and it doesn't come when the service changes. RTPI systems are not updated with timetable changes after a change. Timetable can change the way it is presented, but not in the registration, and that can be easily missed and not replicated in the RTPI system. Many operators fall guilty of not updating their calendars. There are more issues now than there used to be with what is a school day, what isn't a school day, where there's extra bank holidays put in. All this data needs to make sure it's updated and correct. And it's been worse since the academy school systems come into play, because before it was local authorities, now it can be individual schools that have different school day and non-school day variations. There can be variations in the intermediate stop times in timetables. Who does the predictions of those times? If Travelline fill in the gaps between the timing points, the operator mapping system can be different. Operators might be putting padding into their timetable, so they end up with a different time to what is presented to the customer. it's important that all the timetables match. I've seen cases where operators with a service with the inbound and outbound is different to Travelline. That will cause big issues. Now, this is not a knock of Travelline. They can only deal with what data they are provided with, and the electronic method of sharing will now help. Excuse me. Trip numbers not matching in duty and timetable. Bus fleet numbers not correct. 2 buses going around with the same fleet number. Ticket machine swaps, and they're not correct in that, can all cause issues. We've also had GPS and GPRS issues. North Wales is a particularly bad area for a phone signal, and we've all seen geo-hopping where they can't pick up in tall buildings or trees are blocking the satellite signal. Next slide, please. So the NAPTAM database, there are many bus stops that locate that have the incorrect longitude or latitude, and they've since moved. Multiple bus stops out there still with names like Woolworths are still there somewhere. Bus stops that exist in the real world but are not in the database. I actually saw once there was a bus stop being having a new curb and new bus shelter fitted. It didn't exist in the NAPTAM database. Here and opposite bus stops don't work for modern technology because the headings are wrong. We need to have 2 bus stops, and changes to bus stations where there could be an update to the bus station, and that doesn't follow through. Next slide, please. Another issue can be how fares are calculated between stops. If it's a fare stage stop, then it's just calculated. If you click again, if it's not a fare stage stop, then it's calculated from the bus stop when you board. Click again. If you're light, it's charged to the bus stop that you go to. That can cause a big problem with actually calculating the accurate fare, and a lot of apps aren't able to pick that up. We go on to the next slide. I'm starting to run out of time now. So it is therefore vital that we have accurate and consistent data. There are signs that systems are catching up. Efforts to make improvements in data flow are clearly showing. There's more effort needed in keeping systems up to date to allow automatically to be updated manually. Local authority highway departments need to be educated on the importance of the NAPTAM database, the informed passenger transport units when they make changes. Next slide. I'm conscious I'm running out of time now. Going forwards, franchising is giving great opportunities for an improvement in integrated ticketing data across the regions. There's developments in QR codes. We've just managed to get RDG QR codes read on bus for Rovers and Rangers in North Wales. QR codes there's some interesting developments in QR codes. You could put the QR code on the vehicle, and the app becomes the ticket machine. So instead of presenting the QR code to the vehicle presents the QR code to the app, and the fare can be calculated that way. And I think Lucy already covered this one quite well, but I recently travelled in Switzerland using my app, using GPS to work out where I was travelling, and FareTick's now available in Switzerland, Germany, France, and is developing across quite a few countries. The apps are available doing a similar thing, but that's really interesting growth area there. Next one, that's it from me. Sorry, I've had to rush at the end there a bit.
Thank you so much, Chris. I'll be honest, that was quite disheartening, just to hear all the errors in the data. That makes things so much harder. To what extent are we looking at kind of human error, or maybe a lack of funding to actually do the updates or automate? You know, in my mind, things can just be automated. So
Yes.
Are there solutions to these?
There are solutions. There is quite a bit of human error in there. Sometimes it can be one tick box can make all the difference, and if that tick box isn't ticked, the whole system collapses. I think it's really important that we have the data from end to end. So what's set up in the scheduling system then works right the way through to what is sent. I mean, we're going to start doing electronic, sending trans exchange timetables to Travelline rather than just sending a piece of paper written on the back of a napkin is going to be far better. But then we need to make sure that the drivers are using the right trip numbers, that it follows all the way through. The trip number matches the other systems. It's got to flow from start to finish. And I think like I said in my presentation, a lot of people think the ticket machine is where it all comes from, but it's what goes into it and then how it feeds out again. It's got to be dealt with from end to end. Yeah, human error.
Fantastic.
And also an understanding. So if you swap a ticket machine, change the fleet number in it so you don't have two buses going around with the same number.
Yeah.
Something really simple like that can just throw it.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Chris. We will talk again shortly.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's the end of our kind of set of presentations to do our context setting. We're now going to briefly hear from each of our representatives from local areas doing very exciting things, and then we will move into panels. So do start asking questions in the Q&A. So I will hand over to Jorgen.
Thank you, Sally. Hello, everybody. I'm just going to go through, first of all, I'm responsible for the delivery of mobility as a service for both Nottingham and Derby. So I'm just going to go through a few of the bits of the lessons learned that we've experienced in delivering that solution. One thing I will just say, can we go to the next slide, please? One thing I will just say, though, is that I think the very first one I put together was in 2001 for TfL, for the London Journey Planner. A lot of the issues we're experiencing today haven't really moved on that far, and I'll go through why that is. So what I'm going to concentrate on today is more the lessons learned, the local challenges, and then, shall we say, the more global challenges, if we wanted to actually do this on a national scale, what that would entail. Next slide, please. So from a procurement point of view, and this is where we're at within our journey, it's probably true to say that the procurement and defining exercise took far too long. The problem is, unless you actually define it properly, you don't really know what you're going to get. And I'll hit that in a little bit more detail. Next slide, please. So progress today, with everything that Chris just mentioned, we've actually probably experienced and working through. So we are looking at NAPTAN data ingestion, and we've already identified that actually needs updating to get accurate journey planning. We've also identified within Nottingham and Derby that we weren't comfortable delivering a solution which wasn't a seamless interface to the user, which required us to have what we call level 3 integrations or level 3 API integrations, which are essentially everything remains in the single app. You don't get passed off to another service. You don't have to re-log in. You don't have to re-enter data. Now, in a lot of cases, well, not a lot of cases, but certainly some cases, those level 3 integrations or level 3 APIs just simply don't exist at this point because there really is no standardization around them. Next slide, please. So what we started off doing from a Nottingham and Derby point of view is really trying to identify what the requirements are going to be. And we did that through a number of different exercises. And one thing I was really interested to hear from Stephen was that this is really about, and needed to be about, not obviously we've all got drivers, but one area that particularly resonated with me was not only modal shift and modal change, reduction of carbon, but also transport for everybody. And we felt that one of the USPs that we would have in Nottingham and Derby was to actually focus on that, and particularly look at intermodal transport, the combination of private to public, because if we didn't concentrate on that, then what we're really trying to achieve. So we went through this market sounding, we went through workshops to identify requirements, we developed a high-level specification, and then from there created detailed requirements. And despite the time we took, I've got to say it probably wasn't detailed enough, and I'll hit some of those later. Next slide, please. So local challenges, and this is where the devolved transport network in the UK really doesn't work with us. We have 13 different public transport providers. We have 2 different micromobility providers. We have 1 shared service provider, and we have 2 private vehicle solutions, which includes both bike and car. In total, we have 26 different ticketing solutions in just Nottingham and Derby. And that's and to a certain extent, some of that's quite helpful because we've got the Robin Hood card, which we can essentially integrate with almost everybody. But each of the different operators has their own solution. We also have the Spectrum card in Derby. So what's happening here is some operators are their own solution and Robin Hood, some operators are their own solution and the Spectrum, and some are doing all 3 and perhaps even more. So it really does create a rod for our own back and actually make this far more complicated than it probably needs to be. Next slide, please. So in doing all of this, what we thought we knew and what we didn't know, and the reason I put this slide up is not to name and shame ourselves, but to really demonstrate that actually you really got to dig under the covers in a lot more detail than you probably thought you had to. And when we started approaching this, we felt, we were told that actually we had Trent Barton, NCT, CT4N as being our bus operators. As it turns out, we are, as I said, something like 13 or 14 of those. The other thing that you should bear in mind is these things change. So new operators come on all the time. We've actually now got a new e-scooter provider. We now have different real-time traffic data that we first thought we had. And from a ticketing point of view, as I said, we were just completely wrong. Next slide, please. So what we now know, I think in any devolved environment, you're going to have a very, very, very complicated ticketing and payment solution. And what Lucy said in terms of addressing that is absolutely key. We have to make sure that we either streamline this as much as possible, and what we've done with in Nottingham and Derby is essentially say, these are the ticketing solutions we're going to go live with. After that, we'll identify any additional ones we need to accommodate. But what we couldn't do is essentially integrate with 26. We would never be finished. The other area that threw us a little bit, we expected there to be 1 or 2 changes of ticketing solutions through the lifespan of this project. There are actually 5 different mobility service providers that are getting new ticketing solutions exactly at the same time as we're launching this, which is June this year. So it really is going to be a baptism of fire to try and bring all that together. And we've had to think very nimbly to try and identify how we accommodate that in the short term and then the longer term as well. Next slide, please. Other issues, and as Chris just said, it's all about the data. We found that the NAPTAN data was wholly inaccurate and it does need updating, and that will be updated before we go live. And of course, if you don't have accurate stop information, how are you going to have accurate scheduling through your journey planner? It just doesn't work. We also identified the fact that there is no standard for cancelled data. So it's all well and good having disruption data, but if a service doesn't leave a tool, actually it's up to the operator to provide that information, and it's not their primary focus. So quite a lot of the time that doesn't actually exist. So it's another area that I feel we need to work on. We're using OpenStreetMaps. The footpath data in there is at best suspect, at worst erroneous. So we do need to look at how we provide real footpath data, particularly where there's a shortcut, which you don't want to be routed around a block if you can actually just go over a pedestrian bridge as an example. So the idea behind that is we're going to use crowdsourced data. And then it comes down to the transport for everybody in terms of mobility impaired information. We're collecting a whole host of additional information, things like lift and escalator information, exit entrance information for stations, platforms, etc. We're also entering or identifying where ticket machines are, vending machines are, etc., just to try and use and provide that user experience. Not just if you're in a wheelchair, but if I'm a parent with a buggy, if I've got a service dog, which I need to be able to get from A to B as well. How do we accommodate that in a much more seamless way? And if you look at one of the EOIs that TfL put out recently, they were looking at this as well. So I think we're on the right track here. Next, please. So I'd like to really summarize this by saying, in my view, there are 5 different areas that we need to address collectively if we're going to actually deliver this on a more national scale. These are all issues that exist on the regional scale as well, but they are areas which I think we can all help each other in helping move forward integrated transportation. So the first one is obviously requirements definition. As I said, we defined it in what I felt was a fairly granular way, only to find that even something like social travel speeds or travel distances really needed a lot more definition. And my thought process around that is we should all share recommendations and requirements. And in all fairness, we were criticized for having too detailed previously, but it's turned out not to be detailed enough. Another area is standardization. API capabilities change, real-time data is different, the cancellation data doesn't exist, data sharing agreements pretty much don't exist at this point in time, and actually everybody hides behind GDPR anyway. So the point being is that we do need to actually start thinking about this in a much more collegial, collaborative way. And that comes on to the collaboration and compromise. If you actually look at the history of mobility as a service applications, several of these have failed simply because of lack of collaboration between transport providers, system integrators, etc. To be successful, we have to work together. This is essentially the precursor to a smart city environment. Unless we work together to make sure that we deliver the best possible solutions for the people where it really matters. These could be life-changing opportunities, particularly in terms of carbon reduction and modal shift. We have to collaborate, and it has to be perhaps even probably our primary focus on this. And then the financial. Obviously, there's the cost of implementation, which isn't cheap. Thereafter, there's business as usual costs. I think I'm fair in saying that we aim, whether we succeed or not is another matter, but we aim to be the first authority to have this self-sustaining. But we're not doing it through advertising, and we're not doing it through adding a premium to a ticket and essentially getting a commission out of it. Excuse me. One turns off the operator and the other one turns off the user. What we're looking at doing is a sponsorship and business-to-business type activities where we can actually demonstrate real benefits and actually be able to provide, shall we say, services specifically for particular user groups as a result. And the other one, which has already been highlighted particularly by Stephen, was legislative. There's something. We've had several authorities approach us and say, can they deliver something similar on the back of our procurement? And the answer to that is no, they can't, because it wasn't ever considered at that point in time, and therefore the contract doesn't actually provide an opportunity for doing so. So if we want to do data sharing, we want to do system sharing, we want to actually work together, there has to be a much more flexible way of being able to bring in other authorities and work together as a unified unit. The other area which I'm against, I've got to be honest, is there's been this suggestion of having a single MAS solution across all of the UK. That way we'll all have the same stuff. I don't think that will probably help from a competitive landscape point of view. I think competitiveness is actually quite beneficial to enhancement and expansion. I think with a competitive landscape, we're more likely to get the opportunity to really push this forward and really push this out further than we probably think we can at the moment. And that sort of leads us on to a question which I think got asked in terms of regional systems before. Can this be done on a national scale? If you look back to Transport Direct were the first, I believe, the first in the world solution to essentially pull together different disparate journey planning information into a single itinerary. And that was done through XML and through a mechanism called Journey Web. Now, if we did that back in, I believe it was 2004, there has to be a way of doing something similar in 2025, where we've got much better opportunity to integrate with different systems, services, solutions, and of course, standards. And on that, I'm going to stop. But thank you so much for your time. I'm going to pass it back to Sally.
Thank you so much, Jorgen. That was incredibly interesting. I'm actually going to hand straight over to Alistair, who's going to tell us a bit about the work going on in Solent.
Hello, folks. We don't have slides. I'm conscious of the time. If people want some questions, I think I'll back on with this as quickly as possible. But Solent is similar to Jorgen's area of operations. We're one of the FTZ projects, and we took a different approach to the MAS app that Jorgen has just outlined. We were awarded our funding in Q2 of 2020, and we had an app live to the public just over 2 years after that. So of all the 4 FTZs in the program, we're the only ones that, well, we're currently the only ones with a fully live operational app. The reason for that was that we decided to get a basic product in the hands of the public and learn from public use of the app and to develop it using a combination of our own strategic thinking and feedback from the public. We've also got a partnership with universities of Southampton and Portsmouth, who do a lot of research on our behalf and bring back data and information to us to inform our development of the app going forward. So the app's been live for just over 2 years. We have a range of tickets available on buses, ferries, bicycles and scooters, and UK rail across the southern part of England. We share the same challenges as Notts and Derby do: the variety of operators, the variety of tickets available, the willingness of operators to share all of their ticketing with us. Makes it quite a challenge for us to offer a complete service that we would like to do. But we have succeeded pretty well in integrating journey planning and ticket sales and ticket fulfillment. One of our challenges, and this goes back to the discussion that Chris had with us about data regarding disruptions. Disruption data is still something that we struggle with. So getting tickets into people's hands is, I hesitate to use the word straightforward, but it is kind of straightforward. Something we still need to improve on with our app is helping customer when things start to go wrong. When there is disruption on the system, what do they do next? But we're looking forward to the next year of continued improvements on the app. And as I say, I'm conscious of time, so maybe I should stop there and hand back to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Alistair. So yes, I'll hand straight over to Sam from TFGM.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Yeah, really interesting just seeing progress from other colleagues. And as TFGM, we've previously done a number of mass kind of pilots before COVID, but we decided to go a different direction at the end. And for us, our, I guess, customer experience provision is done in a modular way where we have separate solutions for ticketing, a separate solution for journey planning, and a separate solution for disruption information. And the idea is that there's a single access point for all of that, a shop front, if you will, that the app kind of sits on top of, that all these component feeds into and gives us that flexibility to change. I'm not going to talk too much around some of the stuff we're doing on contactless. I think like everybody else, ticketing is still a key challenge. But for us in GM with the B network transition, one of the big focus with the coming to March is around contactless capping for bus as well as tram, kind of similar to London, but there's long-term aspirations of moving towards contactless capping for rail and kind of other services that feeds into our B network kind of offering and how that could work long term. But I think more importantly, it's not just about simplifying the customer experience. At the same time, it's providing us invaluable data that historically we don't have anymore because of how the model's been broken post-COVID. The other kind of key points I want to touch on with a lot of the work that colleagues done in terms of bus franchising and the B network, the two key factors on adopting the modes and utilizing sustainable transport in GM was around reliability and safety. And the colleagues in the organization have tried to tackle some of that with our journey planning work, where we work with a third party to create a tailored journey planner that has recommendation based on rules that we set as an organization, you know, to enable people to plan journeys with certain distance of walk, a certain amount of kind of dwell time, but in that true multimodal manner. And kind of since fully switching over to kind of publicly owned as far as franchising, we've seen a huge amount of demand on using the journey planner to plan the journey. But one of the things that kind of for colleagues to take away is I think we still need to focus on getting the basics right. There was a very much a piece early on in the development and the deployment of the app around being able to just see a bus on a map that you're about to take. You know, I think there's been some new learned behavior that people have adopted through things like Uber and other services around what information they want, and that reliability and physically seeing a bus moving towards the stop that isn't a phantom bus. So getting a lot of that consistent and reliable has been a big part of it. And that data set feeds into other work that we're doing in terms of how we manage traffic and flow. I think the last point I want to kind of leave colleagues with is post-COVID, the model for travel has changed significantly. We're still seeing numbers of people traveling back using sustainable transport for commuting, but actually a lot of the focus now is for leisure activities over the weekend, for football matches to music concerts and events. So one of the pilots that we've started to do with Manchester City Stadium is, could we provide people with tailored journey, season ticket holders with tailored journey planners and journey plans to travel sustainably? And can we provide different journey plans depending on which gate they're sitting, and offer that hyper local routing so that we can start using the journey planner to influence behavior, but helps us load balance from an operational perspective and kind of really tackle that behavior change? Because all this tech is great, but at this core, it has to influence travel behavior. It has to help us improve service operations and safety. But yeah, more to come in the space. It's really exciting, and yeah, look forward to hearing more in the panel.
Thank you very much, Sam. That was really interesting. Okay, so let's go to panel. We've only got about half an hour left. So let's try and get some good discussions going on. So there's a few questions that have come up. I think one question that has occurred to me in hearing about all these incredible local initiatives, so probably this question is more for our local representatives. Who are you thinking about when you think of your customers in your area? Because I think I'm seeing very strong branding and very strong local knowledge, particularly something, I was in Manchester recently and there were little bees on all the eggs. I've never seen that before, a whole basket of boiled eggs with bees printed on them. And obviously I'm familiar with Bee Network, but I'm just wondering if the local integration of things it becomes very familiar, but it does seem to be quite reliant on using an app and having someone come into the area and know it. And, I think even someone who is quite experienced with technology would go into an area and think, I don't know what's going on here. I don't recognize this. So I guess if I try and turn that into an accurate question, who are you catering for? And do you think you are catering to people visiting areas? Should we start with Sam?
Yeah, I'll cover this off. So as I touched on, we're starting to working a lot more with venue kind of owners and how we help them kind of achieve their net zero objectives as well, because a lot of these venues do have kind of environmental targets that they want to hit as well. I think that question of who is the customer is very difficult, because it's not just the end user, it's from an operational perspective, we want the data. And just to quickly touch on answer your question around this discoverability perspective, I think just to clarify, I'm not saying an app is going to solve all the problems. We need to get some of the historical physical stuff back in place, like wayfinding, digital information, and kind of other provisions. So it's going to be a kind of a holistic kind of system approach for it. I think people just, it still requires, I think just to clarify, it still requires physical people on the ground. So for our Bee Network operation, we had kind of agents and different kind of colleagues at interchanges, just being that friend. It's not just about information provision, it's that perception of safety and knowing someone that can talk to. And the number of different languages that people speak now in Greater Manchester because of the metropolitan nature of it, it's kind of huge. So that's actually one part of it, as I say, get the basics right. I think the last thing I would say is we need to do more around the next generation. So how do we work with colleagues, at DFE and kind of schools really to get kids using sustainable transport and comfortable to use sustainable transport from the get-go, and for parents, more importantly, to feel that it's safe for kids to use sustainable transport, because I think there's a perception of that, but a lot of the times it's not necessarily true.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. Jürgen, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, obviously what we're doing in Nottingham and Derby is try and do transport for everybody. So we are doing very much personalised journey planning experience. That said, we would be foolish if we didn't take into account or at least understand the needs of the universities with 60,000 students just in Nottingham. So we're certainly looking at that in quite a lot of detail. And obviously, I did mention that we're trying to also be self-sustaining right from the get-go. So we are looking at what kind of business-to-business activities we can undertake to better support those businesses to try and get some kind of revenue stream from those. And actually, I'm going to be catching up with Sam on that. In all fairness, Sam, made yourself a volunteer. But thank you.
Thank you, Jorgen. Alistair, any comments?
Yeah, yeah, I think we've addressed a lot of them. A lot of the discussions, the problems around are we just aiming at people who know where they're going? I think the journey planner allows me to stand anywhere in Southampton and say, how do I get from where I am to somewhere? Which standard ticketing apps tend to rely on you knowing where you are and where you're going. So that's worked very well for us. We allocated quite a high proportion of our budget to advertising and marketing of the app to make sure that people knew that the app existed. We've had targeted campaigns for students, so back to university or freshers week and that kind of thing, and that has had quite a significant effect on take up of the app and usership of the app. And in fact, we do an entire presentation on the importance of the marketing aspect of the app, because it doesn't really matter how good the app is if nobody knows that it exists. They're not going to pick it up and use it. So that advertising has been primarily local. It's on local radio, it's on bus stops and things like that, and that has had quite a good contribution to take up of the app and continued use.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we've got some questions that I think we can probably answer. We will get on to how do we scale up to national in a moment, but questions we can be thinking about the local, but I think some of our context setters with the first presentations will be able to help with this. And I think actually you've probably answered some of these questions as we've gone along. But there have been some thoughts on the importance of integrating rail, bus, tram in terms of both timetabling. And actually, I've got a good sense of why that's not as simple as we might hope, but also in terms of pricing and ticketing. So I think perhaps if we first ask some of our local representatives how you are approaching those challenges, maybe any advice that you would have for other areas, and then we can broaden that out to some of the people with more of a national perspective in terms of how they think they can do that. So I guess the question is, from a customer perspective, I don't want one solution for rail, one solution for tram, one solution for bus. I want to get off my train, get on a bus, get on my e-scooter and arrive. So should we start maybe with Sam again?
I mean, that's a tough one. I think is a question that I've been trying to answer for the past 7 years at TFGM doing this mass work. I think so. I'll break it down into two parts. I think there is definitely something about fair strategy and considering what a fair strategy look like for the region and the policy objectives you want to achieve as part of that. I think now we're on the other side of fully owning the bus operations. There's a lot more focus around, well, what does an equitable fare look like? I mean, you've probably seen Andy Burnham maintaining the £2 kind of capping. I think sometimes people forget that it's not just about the cost, it's the simplicity of the product. Like, it's just remove like any thinking that people need. They just hop on the bus and they can go. So I think there's definitely an aspect kind of around that needs to be considered more. And then in terms of information across the piece, I think with this new government and the integrated transport strategy, there is aspiration for more kind of centralized and consolidation of data sets, so that information can be derived from it. And I think colleagues have seen the benefit of the Bus Open Data Portal. You know, how do we scale it up in that sense? So I think there's still a lot more work to do, but yeah, it's an exciting time in the next few years.
Thanks, Sam. You're good?
Yeah, as Sam said, I'm really pleased you went to Sam first, because I thought, oh, no idea how to tackle that one. But I think the benefit, the objective of a MAS solution is to bring everything into one application. So, as per the environment that Stephen spoke about right from the beginning in France, how do we make this simple? How do we make this easy? What we're doing in Nottingham and Derby is bringing all that data directly into our journey planning, making sure that real-time information is available within that journey planning application. As I said, we've got issues with cancellation data. We don't have the same issues as Alistair mentioned in terms of disruption data. That all comes through BODs or various other forms that we've got at the moment. But we are bringing all of that into us into our solution on a local level. How that works when you actually bring it into a international level, though, is very, very different. And I think that's what we really probably need to be concentrating on. Regional, it's easy. We can load timetables, etc. But then how you stitch it together, that's when it becomes a little bit more challenging. Back to you.
Thank you, Jorgen. Alistair, how are you facing these challenges in Solent?
Well, I was equally relieved that you didn't come to me first on this one, because it's one of the biggest challenges. We did a workshop recently at one of our conferences, just saying, well, how does somebody lay their hands on a ticket to use public transport? And if you were doing a multimodal journey, we identified about 17 different retail channels for you to buy a ticket. You can go to a website, you can use an app, you can go to a ticket office, you can go to PayZone in your local corner shop. And so everyone agrees that the landscape is way too fragmented in terms of retail channels, fulfillment methods, and all kinds of things. But I think everybody did agree also, strangely, that what we don't want to do is go to a single solution trying to fit everything. We keep getting bombarded with ABT as the silver bullet for absolutely everything, and it's probably a silver bullet for 75% of commuting journeys. But there are lots of instances and lots of circumstances which prevent people using that. So I haven't got an answer for this. I think we're talking about a well-known problem, a well-recognized problem, and the answer to it probably is a greater level of centralization. But I would definitely steer away from a single solution that fits everything, because I think we all know that doesn't work either.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Alistair. I wonder if I could come to you, Lucy, to see if we can learn anything from overseas. Is there anything we can learn? You're mute.
Apologies. Yeah, I'm sure there's lots we can learn from lots of different approaches taken. We've got there's the D ticket in Germany that has been successful, which is a flat fare for train travel across the country. As I mentioned earlier, in SYSTRA, they're using a flat fare approach, which has been very popular with the customers. It's one fare, whichever mode of transport within the boundaries of the metropolitan area. And that's been very popular with the customers and easy to understand, easy to manage the data on, as you can imagine. So it totally has its benefits from that perspective. There is a lot of data to integrate, but in the transition to that, it's just making it easy to present what we do have in a very simple way, and making that payments piece integrated and simple from the customer's perspective. So just taking away that sort of mental load from them, so they don't have to think hard about which is the cheapest option, which is the best option, which is the best ticket, and having that sort of calculated for them, within the app or within the back office, or through daily capping, or whichever approach you're taking. So yeah.
And can we do that in England, where we have so many different providers to integrate? So I think if we think about Jorgen with, was it 26 different providers that you're...
I mean, technically it's absolutely possible. You put the data into one central solution, and it can be presented to the customer, and the fares can be calculated. Yeah, I think if we're then talking about daily capping or weekly capping across multiple operators, there's the commercial arrangement about how that revenue is then apportioned between them, and how who's gonna I guess fund any revenue dilution that there may be through capping, and how is that accommodated for, and is that covered by an increased use in public transport, or by some other subsidy or funding to incentivize users to use it. So technically, yes, possible. if the data is in the right format and structure to be combined together. Then there's the commercials and, that lay on top of it.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Right, well, I'm going to take that back to our local areas. It can technically be done. What's stopping it? So if there is a technology to have this linking, to what extent is it going on in your local area, and to what extent do you think that is possible nationally, so we could actually imagine a seamless journey that goes across different areas? Rather than picking on someone this time, does someone want to speak up first?
Oh, I might as well start from our end. We're pretty much reliant on the ticketing standards that are imposed upon us from the operators. So one thing that we haven't achieved yet with our app is a single ticket for a multimodal journey. So a lot of people, myself included, were quite keen on the idea of, if I wanted to take a journey that involved a bus, a tram, and then a rental bike, that I would have a single token that would avail those services to me. Again, referring back to a workshop we ran at our conference, there seems to be resistance to that from the operators themselves. Bus operators in particular say 80% of people just get on the same bus every morning, get on the same stop, get off at the same stop. So why are you bothering with a multimodal product? And until we can either persuade them, strong arm them, or demonstrate value to them, it's going to be quite difficult to get them to cooperate with a single token for those multiple multi-mode journeys.
That's really, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Alistair. Jorgen or Sam?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, go on, you go.
No, Sam, you first.
All right. Yeah, I think just to kind of, from a GM perspective, I think franchising helps a little bit on some of the commercial side of things. It's not going to solve everything, and I think we just have to be clear, though, as we touched on already. Do we try to do everything in one app, or is it around certain things at a regional level and then certain things at the interregional level? I think we've seen the like of Trainline and other solutions that have risen and kind of became popular because they provide a superior customer experience, right? In terms of that interregional travel, I think there's a question around how we develop the best from a local travel perspective, but then what the other piece around interregional travel looks like, rather than trying to build the one thing. Because I think with all IT system, we try to do that, but I think there's baby steps towards it. I think the other thing I would say is, when we think about travel and kind of ticketing, it's all payments at the end of the day, right? And contactless has kind of leveled the playing field, especially post-COVID, in terms of use. There's been a significant reduction in cash. I'm not saying we get rid of cash. There will be still people that use cash. But I think we need to look at kind of these new societal trends and leverage them to build kind of solutions on top of, rather than trying to build something separate. Now, that might change in a few years' time when we decide that actually we need more data and other things. But I think at current, it is how we link payment, not just to transport, but purpose of the transport. Why do they travel? And as I mentioned, leisure and so on and so forth.
Great, thank you, Sam. Jorgen?
Yeah, I'm just going to reiterate what Sam and Alistair said, so please move on. But yeah, I agree with everything that's been said so far.
Okay, thank you.
Alistair wanted to come back in, didn't he?
Oh, yeah.
I was going to just quickly say that this conversation is revolving, to my mind, around city and urban travel, and an awful lot of public transport travel in this country is much further away than that. And so something that no one's ever managed to explain to me how we deal with this is things like tap in, tap out works when the cost doesn't matter, or when it's a distressed purchase. So if I'm going to work 5 days a week in Manchester, I just tap in, tap out, and pay the bill. You can't have that with a university student going home at Easter from Manchester to Newcastle and not knowing how much the train fare is going to be. They have to know in advance what they're in for. And that isn't being covered by any of these conversations today. So I don't know if anybody on the panel has got a view on that one.
Isn't that GBR to sort?
Yeah, well, they claim to be doing it.
Yeah.
I will just say we've only got just over 10 minutes left. So if anybody observing has any questions that you wanted to make sure were answered, please add them to the Q&A now. So there are a couple of things. So we had a question, how would the panel propose to solve the last mile problem? So, oh, Sam, you look like you have a view.
I feel bad now. It depends. So I think we need to just be very clear. When we talk about the last mile, sometimes we fall under this fallacy that is everything, but there is a last mile for passenger travel and there's last mile for logistics as well. So being very clear with those two is a key thing. And the reason why I say that is that actually some of the logistic behavior might be different, where someone could pick up a parcel at the parcel lock as part of their sustainable journey. It changes the dynamic. But I think the challenge we're seeing with, I guess, last mile is trying to work out how it integrates into those core sustainable transport offering, like bus, like tram, and what are the optimal kind of distances that we want people use these services for. I think we're still trying to determine where's the right balance for bikes and like things like new modes, where's the right balance for e-scooters in the future as well in terms of that fit. And I don't have the answer to that at the moment, but I think the general consensus, and historically people will use what's most optimal for them, and some of those behavior and patterns will appear. It's just making sure we have the data to support it kind of over time. So I think that's, I guess, some of the key challenges. And yeah, the only other thing I would say is don't forget about the car. I know that sounds really weird from someone that works at TFGM, but I think there is a consensus that is the right mode for the right purpose. And sometimes you just have to use a car just due to how planning has been put in place in this country. But they don't necessarily need to own a car. So where's your parking provision, as kind of Jordan's touched on in terms of park and ride, but more importantly, things like car clubs and solutions like that and what role they play. But we're still learning and just trying to work out.
Anyone else on the panel have comments on last mile? Thank you,
Jürgen. Yeah, obviously we've taken a slightly different approach. We're certainly implementing micromobility, which is absolutely essential for first mile, last mile. But what we're also looking at is, as I mentioned earlier on, is intermodal. How do we actually get, as Sam just said, how we actually better promote the car driver to actually transition from car at a sensible location, which then enables them to take public transport thereafter, and actually frees up the transport network, or certainly the road network during peak hours. So the problem with that is it's a lot more complicated than it sounds. The issue isn't getting from A to B; it's actually getting back from B to A. So now we have to remember where the car is. Now we have to identify that the parking lot is still going to be open at that time. There's still going to be services at that time when they need to go back. So there's a lot more information, a lot more interaction with that user to actually make sure that they can get from A to B, but also from B to A. So I'll pass you back.
Thank you, Jürgen. And did you have anything to add, Alistair? No. Okay, wait. Well, I'm going to ask one last question. Oh, sorry.
Not on that
I'm going to ask one last question. So what is the essential difference between countries that are piloting a national scheme, Holland, France, New Zealand, Germany to an extent, and the UK? Lucy, you've come off mute. Do you have something to say on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big differences is the commitment from the government and the funding that's put behind it. You know, just from experience of the French side of things, there is, you know, when we see the budgets that are put both at a regional level and at a national level, they are showing a complete commitment to making a shift from car drivers into more sustainable modes of transport to meet their, you know, climate goals that are being set. So, you know, obviously totally understand, you know, funding is difficult to come by, and there's, you know, competition for government funding from all, you know, walks of life. But yeah, it is quite evident the difference in the funding commitment between the countries that we operate in anyway. So yeah.
Thank you, Lucy. I'm actually going to ask Stephen. Sorry, I know I haven't been asking you many questions here. I wondered if you might have a view on that, the political will and funding.
fine not to ask me the questions about the detail of delivering these integrated transport systems. And I've been taking copious notes on the challenges and opportunities at a local level. And so many of them are the things that come up in our conversations with a wide range of people, particularly those with disability and others who are looking to use this, or my own experience trying to get around with kids, one on my shoulders and one in a buggy. How do you do that using these range of modes that you were talking about? Funding political will. If I had the answer on funding political will, I'd probably be in cabinet myself. I think there is a clear direction of travel for support for what we are talking about today, and whether or not that can translate, given the wider tensions that the government are on for competing things that they need to spend money on, all of those kind of things, we don't know. I think the worst case, I hope, is no less money than we've been playing around with up until now. And I think we unlock more the better we align this with the wider agenda that they're pointing to. The better you can point to transport and integrated transport that we're talking about here as delivering local growth and delivering a meaningful impact at the high level, the better. But it's not a language that all of us are used to. We're much more kind of considering of the inclusion and other parts of this agenda. And I think the same goes for kind of health. The more closely this is aligned with what comes from the 10-year plan for the NHS and that move to prevention, the better. And I think there's so many parts of this that can be exciting. What we do see at political will is definitely it's there at the local level on lots of these cases, and it's just that translation to national. And I think the point that maybe also needs reflecting when we're talking about integration, and I think Sam kind of reflected this in talking about the role of the car, is what other reforms are needed around the convenience and accessibility of cars to help make some of these solutions more sustainable. Where can parking reforms, the future of taxation once we move away from fuel duty, where will these integrate into our view of how we want people to get around and how we can best support them to access some of these things kind of conveniently?
Great, thank you, Stephen. Okay, so I guess we need to wrap up. I think I'll just go around the panel and just give you the opportunity to make any final comments, any final reflections on today's session. So sorry, Stephen, since you're still on my screen, can I start with you? Just anything, maybe think about something you've learned from other panelists that's really exciting, or just any final comments you'd like to share.
Mainly a comment on thank you for all of those doing the hard graft on the ground, ironing out those issues with data and the real nuts and bolts. Like, it's all well and good for people like me to sit at a high level, kind of talking about principles and that kind of high level strategy. It is nothing without ironing out those things, because it's those issues which is where like trust in local government, trust in government are worked through. It's being able to tell people that you can rely on these things and your money, your taxpayers' money, is being spent into something that will make a difference to your lives and those around you. So I mean, my point is just a thank you and keep doing it.
That's
and
lovely.
keep sharing your learnings.
And Lucy, any final comments?
Yeah, no, it's been a really good discussion, and thank you to everyone who's input into it. I think from my perspective, it's just really, keeping the customer really at the centre of it, and really thinking through what is the real priority of an integrated transport network that's really going to incentivize and motivate the customer to really use it, and really consider it a compelling alternative and option to the car and other less sustainable modes of transport. So it's great if we work really hard to get all the data, and we've got technical solutions, the data's in place, we even get the commercials all sorted, but if it's not designed in a way that's really going to work for the customer, then we will have missed a massive opportunity.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Chris, another person I need to apologise for not asking so many questions during the panel. Did you want to make any final comments?
Well, it's been an interesting discussion. Yeah, it's we could talk for 5 hours and we probably still won't iron out the issues. I think we need to have more of an integrated society than just integrated transport. It's all very well if the bus runs at 10 o'clock and the cinema doesn't close till 10:05, you've missed your bus. And I think we need to integrate far better into society, and society needs to understand the parameters and the difficulties of transport to fit around it as well, and maybe adjust accordingly.
Thank you so much. Jürgen, any final comments?
Yeah, it's a really interesting discussion. Thank you for the invitation. I think my one takeaway is that data and standardization of data and systems wherever possible. And obviously, a devolved environment doesn't help us from an integrated transport strategy or integrated transport solutions. And I'll stop there. Thanks, Sally. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Jürgen. Alistair?
Yeah, and once again, thanks for inviting me on. Yeah, for me, we said the technology isn't the difficult bit. We know probably where the solutions are for us. For me, it's commitment from government to making this happen. And my advice to them would also be, don't try and reinvent the wheel. We have there's a lot of instances of this working in a lot of countries around Europe, so we should learn the lessons from them and implement it.
Great, thank you, Alistair. And finally, Sam?
Yeah, no, really interesting discussion. I think the last kind of thoughts from me is, with the journey planners and all the tools that we have in MAS, don't think of it as just a customer kind of point. That there's a lot of data that sits behind that will help local authorities and public sector long term in terms of operation of our services and influence travel behavior. So really start to think about how can you leverage that data for strategic and operational use cases.
Right, well, thank you so much, all of our panellists. That's been incredibly interesting. Thank you very much, Landor, for hosting this. Thank you, SYSTRA, for sponsoring. Thank you to Val, Juliana, and Duncan. And thank you, everybody, for listening. Enjoy the rest of your day.